I'm Josina Anderson with The Exhibit, presented by Body Armor. Now, you can find my show on YouTube with the handle at The Exhibit Concept, put the clips out on Twitter and also on Instagram under my own name handle. Now, quickly, I am going to go through some notes that I've been gathering on certain NFL teams as it pertains to the general manager and coaching carousel that is ongoing right now with the National Football League. So let's get right to it and start with the Raiders. All right, so per a league source, I'm hearing that the Raiders were trying to get information on two coaches in particular prior to making an official announcement on their decision with Antonio Pierce. One of those coaches is Mike Vrabel. The other, I don't know his name. I did ask. It's not Deion Sanders, at least in this period before Antonio Pierce's dismissal. And I'm also told that the outcome of these conversations were going to have a direct impact on Antonio Pierce's status. Obviously, they moved on from him. The Raiders are going to go on with their search as mandated, by the league and the Rooney rules. But clearly, they had some preliminary favorites that they were trying to gather input on. Let's move on to the Cowboys. Per a league source, I'm told that some named players have gone to Cowboys ownership, particularly Jerry Jones, and expressing their advocacy for Mike McCarthy being retained in his current position as head coach and making their feelings known. I'm also told, my understanding is that the Cowboys would like to have a decision before Mike McCarthy's contract elapses. He signed a 5-year contract in 2020 that expires January 14th. That is a preference in terms of getting it done before that. And also, I am hearing that in these conversations, one of the things being expressed to Mike McCarthy is what's going to be different. You're coming back. Jerry Jones is getting up there in age. Clearly, he's done well in the 5 years that he's been there with records of 6-10, 12-5, 3 years consecutively after that, 7-10, has made 3 appearances in the 5 years in playoffs, but those playoff appearances resulting in losses. So they want to know what are the aspects that are going to change, particularly on defense. Let us go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Interesting note here. Per a league source, I am hearing that the Jaguars are potentially open to adding another personnel member to their staff that would report directly to owner Shad Khan, work directly with general manager Trent Baalke. At least, as things currently stand right now, there's no timeline on when this potential addition will be made. But that's what I'm hearing, definitely per a league source. And then speaking of the Jaguars as well, yes, former Jets head coach Robert Saleh is going to interview with the Jaguars for their head coaching vacancy. He was their linebackers coach between 2014 2016. I'm hearing that he's expected to actually interview next week, sometime between Tuesday and Thursday. We'll get a definitive date really soon. I'm going to pass on the Jets right now, do that as a separate report because I'm waiting on somebody to text me on something I wanted to include in this report and they're taking forever. So we're going to move on. Let's talk about the Titans. Obviously, I tweeted earlier that there were people around the league that were monitoring and talking about the general manager job. Reported that a few days ago, expressing concerns and having questions as it relates to the role and final say surrounding the general manager job that Rand Carthon held before. I was also hearing that people were having questions or hearing about, the potential dynamic between Carthon and some of the people who've been in the building for a long time and what the dynamic was, with that. So these are some of the things that were coming up prior to the announcement today. Obviously, some of the things that did not help is the performance of Will Levis, having 13 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, making some ghastly mistakes that clearly, cost the team. Not saying that he can't evolve, just not showing elite performances right now. These are not things that were helpful, particularly when you consider the fact that Mike Vrabel, former head coach of the Titans, is having a sweetheart courtship right now across the league. These are things that altogether are not helping the optics. As I summarize this quickly, obviously there's more to it than that. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, particularly with the news now that there have been 2 Black head coaches in their first years that have lost their job, namely in Gerard Mayo and Antonio Pierce. Not a good look for the league. And as a league source, highly placed league source said, not so uncommon of a notion that you cannot win without having a quarterback. Obviously, in talking about Antonio Pierce, it doesn't matter that he's expressed his confidence in Aiden O'Connell. That's what he's supposed to do. That's not denigrating AOC, but that's just talking about the fact that clearly Antonio Pierce could have benefited from an upgrade at quarterback. It's not to say that there aren't teams like the Ravens back in the day with Trent Dilfer and what have you, no shade at Dilfer, but whatever, that haven't won with the quote unquote elite quarterback. But when you're in your first year, this is obviously something that is helpful. Doesn't mean that Antonio Pierce didn't have his shortcomings. There doesn't mean that there aren't places where things could have been, more refined. But these are things that get better. These are things that evolve when you have more time in the role. And I'm going to get to Jerod Mayer, but I wanted to say this quickly. This is not just about advocating for Black head coaches just because I'm a Black journalist. So let's just get that out of the way. If you know me, I can give you a ton of examples why you wouldn't even say that. But the point of the matter is, as I'm trying to wrap up this video, is that it's about just fundamental fairness. Now let's go on to Jerod Mayo. While I've heard people say, well, he wasn't just fired because of the record. Look at the press conference. Look at how, he dealt with some of the players. Look at some of the things that were said, in the locker room, all these other things. One thing that hasn't changed at this point and is similar to the beginning of the season is the roster. A league source said that ownership expressed at the beginning of the year that Bill Belichick, quote, left them with nothing and that the roster was decimated. That is something that has not changed, and it's not to denigrate the current players that are on the roster, but obviously there are levels to the skills that players have throughout the league in terms of what can be added, and those are things that Jerod Mayo and any coach would benefit from, particularly out of the first season. Okay, so that is what we're talking about, just having the ability to be able to progress. And it's not to just say this has just happened to Black coaches. When you're looking at the list of people over the past 10 years that have lost their job in their first year, whether it be Antonio Pierce, Jerod Mayo, Frank Reich, Lovie Smith, Nathaniel Hackett, David Culley, Urban Meyer, Freddie Kitchens, Steve Wilkes, Chip Kelly, Jim Tomsula, Mike Mularkey, Hugh Jackson, Rob Chudzinski. Obviously, the list is diversified in terms of people who have lost their job. It still doesn't take away from the fundamental fact of fairness. And if you're going to also put in a statement that there were expectations and disappointments surrounding the fact that the team didn't continue to kind of ascend in its performance, that statement doesn't marry with the fact that you also have an understanding that the situation was untenable and that the roster is decimated. At the end of the day, beyond the press conference and beyond some of the things that are said in the locker room, which should not be overlooked, but at the end of the day, you have to have the roster in order to win. And that is something that another coach in the new regime is going to get to benefit from, as the next season comes up. So the thing that I'm going to be looking for, although there's people I respect in all of these teams across the league, but just the thing I'm going to be looking at is if the next regime, even maybe in both teams, has 6 wins or less, what is going to be the amount of patience extended to said regimes? That's what I'm going to be looking at. Just curious. Just something I'm going to be looking at. Just curious. I'm Josina Anderson with The Exhibit, presented by Body Armor.